Selamat datang di Jakarta Content Week, sinergi Asia Tenggara yang diselenggarakan oleh Yayasan 17.000 Pulau Imaji. Dengan dukungan Direktorat Jenderal Kebudayaan, Kementerian Pendidikan, Kebudayaan, Riset dan Teknologi Republik Indonesia, serta Lembaga Pengelola Dana Pendidikan LPDP melalui program pemanfaatan hasil kelola dana abadi kebudayaan. Welcome to Jakarta Content Week, Southeast Asia Synergy, the 17,000 Islands of Imagination Foundation in collaboration with the Directorate General of Culture, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology of Indonesia, and the Education Fund Management Institution LPDP through the Cultural Endowment Fund Utilization Program proudly present Road to Jakarta Content Week, Southeast Asia Synergy. This event aimed to bridge the literary worlds of Southeast Asian countries, overcoming challenges such as language differences, geopolitical barriers, and the lack of previous initiative to connect our diverse literary community. Additionally, it would be beneficial if the works of Southeast Asian writers could be more recognized in their own region compared to works from other parts of the world. In a moment, we will start the Our Emerging Southeast Asian Writers Seeking to Move Beyond National Literature session. I will call our moderator who will guide today's session, Dewi Karisma Michelia. Dewi Karisma Michelia is a writer, translator, and editor. Her works include the novel Surat Panjang Tentang Jarak Kita Yang Jutaan Tahun Cahaya, 2013, and the short story collection Elegi, 2017. She is involved in the collective Ruang Perempuan dan Tulisan and works for the Jakarta Arts Council Literature Community. For Dewi Karisma Michelia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mas Francisco. Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Dewi Karisma Michelia. People usually call me Michelle or Mimi, so you can call me Mimi or Michelle. Finally, this is the last session in this JAK10. I'm very excited to be here at JAK10. And as the saying goes, usually people save the best for the last, so let's hope for the best. For the next 2 hours, I will be moderating the event, Our Emerging Southeast Asian Writers Seeking to Move Beyond National Literatures, with, next to me, Ziggy Zeziazio Viana Zavrisky. Yeah, please applause for her. And then there is Sabdarmanyo, far, and then Wanur Azrik, and also Sigrid Mariana Gayangos. Sigi from Indonesia, Dio from Indonesia, Azrik from Malaysia, and Sigrid from the Philippines. Before the session begins, I will introduce each speaker and explain the description of the session. So, after the colonial era and the proclamation of independence by its Southeast Asian nations, the initial efforts of these new societies were focused on forging their national identities. All the literature focused on their national identity, and they emerged as a key medium in shaping the national identity. National literature, driven by the quest to define and solidify the national identity, subsequently established a canon that became the standard for literary perception in Southeast Asian countries. However, decades after independence, is national literature burdened with the weight of national identity? Or is it still relevant among the authors? Today, we witness the emergence of young writers in Southeast Asia who appear liberated from the canonization imposed by national literature in their countries. They explore the many things, the many themes, the many genres outside the national literature. They freely explore the diverse from the various corners of the world, moving in directions unconstrained by the traditional boundaries, as we have read from the works of the 4 writers here. So I will read its bio of the writers here. Sigrid Mariana Gayangos from Zamboanga City, the Philippines, authored Laut Stories and the forthcoming bilingual children's book, Lola Maria's Candles. She is self-translating her second collection into English and teaches at the University of the Philippines, Mindanao. And Sabdarmanyo, he is an Indonesian novelist and short story writer, known for Kamu, 24 Jam Bersama Gaspar, is then adapted into movie, and Dekat dan Nyaring. He resides in South Jakarta. Next to Sabdarmanyo, Wanur Azrik is an award-winning novelist from Kedah, Malaysia. He has published 7 novels, a short story, an essay collection, and translated Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse into Malay. And Sigi Zioviana Zavrisky, she has been publishing her work since 2009 and has received numerous awards and nominations, including from Dewan Kesenian Jakarta, Badan Bahasa, Rolling Stone Indonesia, Tempo Magazine, and English Pen. So many awards. Her notable works include Di Tanah Lada, published in 2015, Semua Ikan di Langit, published in 2017, Kita Pergi Hari Ini, 2021, and Tiga Dalam Kayu, 2022. She now based in Bandar Lampung and dedicates her time to writing. Okay. Hi. Okay. So as the session actually talks about how you guys started your career as a writer, which is actually a little bit different with the previous national writers. I mean, when the writers in your respective countries write about the national identity and also seeking for what is the identity of its country, you guys as the today's generation want to be heard as something else. You guys explore another themes, another genres, even you try to write in like sci-fi and fantasy in many forms. And from there we can actually start the question maybe, how do you guys start to find your own identity, your own calling, and how actually do you guys perceive the national canon imposed by our country? Maybe we can start from Azrik.
I started writing in 2006. So at the time when to be a writer is to be a mainstream writer, because publication at that time was still dominated by mainstream media, the newspapers, magazines, meaning that you have to write national agendas to be accepted as a writer during that time when I started out. So it took me a while just to find my voice, to find the right kind of topic that was close to my life. And then I only published my first novel in 2014, Dublin, which won the first prize in one of the national competition at that time. So it's a novel, nothing to do with any national agenda. So it was basically, I wrote it basically to mirror two things. One, what I was reading at that time, writers like Enrique Villamatas, J.M. Coetzee, Paul Auster, Philip Roth, writers that I could relate, in terms of how they view the world through the form of the novel. And also, I had a lot of free time when I was living in Kuala Lumpur at that time. I was walking a lot. I was looking a lot of people in the city, and I wanted to write a novel about the history of walking and the relation with writing. So that was my main push to write that first novel. I was not thinking about going against the canon or anything like that, but I just wanted to write a novel that reflected who I was at that time and what I felt I needed to express as a starting novelist. So I was quite lucky. It won a prize, so it helped to launch my career in a scene where it's dominated by many senior writers who are very different in terms of agendas, in terms of the way they approach the novel. So then when I went to my second novel, Boneka Rasa Guido, which was written quite at the same time during 2014. It is a novel written in one paragraph. So from beginning to the end, it's just one paragraph. So the topic of that novel reflected what I grew up during the 90s in Malaysia, where there was a big reformation in the mid-90s. Anwar Ibrahim at that time was in government, was kicked out of the government, and he went to the streets of Kuala Lumpur to protest. Every day when I opened the news, that was what I saw. He was doing demonstration in Masjid Negara, at the National Mosque, and there was many images in the media that stuck with my imagination growing up. So I knew that when I write that novel, I wanted to reflect memory of the Reformation during the 90s. So that was my journey in the beginning, and as I grew as a novelist, I explored other forms, other ideas, whether it be an interactive novel, kind of horror novel. That was the most latest one. So as a novelist, I'm always trying to explore new ideas, new form. I try to avoid writing the same kind of novel every time. And so I never start with a theme as a novelist. I've always come from an idea, or a structure, how I want to write the novel. This is a different mindset from most Malaysian writers, where you are expected to write a sastra for masyarakat, as a literature for the people. That is the mindset that is put into every Malaysian writers, whether you're starting out or you are already established. You must write something that has national agenda, that must have meaning, must have moral values. So for me as a writer at that time, when I started out, it felt a bit kind of suffocating that you have to address all these national agendas. But it never kind of bothered me that much, because I knew there were other writers that I was reading that gave me more comfort, more belief in what I wanted to do as a writer. So yeah, I think that's a good starting point. That's how I started my career, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I found two parts interesting. One is about how you write the fiction, like a longer one, started only from one paragraph, and then the next one, the second is about how you mentioned about sastra for like masyarakat. We also have that here in Indonesia, like the division between lekra and also manifest kebudayaan, and that will start our discussion here, I think, about the canon. Maybe you can explain little more about the canon itself in Malaysia, about about that sastra for masyarakat, whether it has any integration, or some authors maybe know the Lekra people here in Indonesia, they know each other, or some sorts.
Well, I'm not downgrading the importance of sastra untuk masyarakat. I think it was important for the country during the 20th century, because it was for independence, to unite the people, to address national issues. But as time went on, as post-independence, there are other issues that I think that writers need to address, and especially 2000 and above, for younger writers, there were other issues in the country that was not being talked about, So when we talk about in Malaysia, the canon is basically writers' books that are either taught in schools, or those writers that are already recognized as national laureates, Sastra Negara. Those are confirmed classical authors, big names that you must look up to and kind of emulate them, So one of the many national laureate writers was Shanon Ahmad. So Shanon Ahmad came from the same hometown that I grew up with in the north of Malaysia, Kedah. So his novels are considered some of the best in the country, and which is rightly so. So he's like level Pramodia here in Indonesia. So his novels are mostly about people growing up in the village. So if you want to imagine how his novel is, imagine Faulkner in US, which write about people in the country, write about his technique was monologue. He uses a lot of monologues, and he was, I think, one of the first novelists in Malaysia to use stream of consciousness, even though it was about people in the village, but it was very psychological. His approach was different, like from the other authors of his time, where they were mostly writing historical novel, but he tried to do something more psychological. So when I came into the scene, I knew he was a big figure that was standing above the national Malaysian literary scene. So I knew that, okay, even though I was from Kedah, I said to myself, I will never write about the people in the village, or never write about paddy fields, because my background was more in the center of town. And I grew up living in two cities, in Alok Star, in Kuala Lumpur. So I wanted a more different approach. But like I said, it never really kind of burdened me. It's not something that I was consciously, or I was not going to write like Shannon. No, because I wanted to share, I wanted to write like those writers I was reading. Because I wanted a fiction that had more fast-paced narration, that could address issues outside of Malaysia as well. Global issues and literature, because I think the novel has so much potential, but after the 90s, it kind of slowed down, because during the 60s, 70s, it was the peak of the Malaysian novel. There were many big novels that were written. And then during the 2000, after the Reformation, all of the golden generation kind of slowed down. They stopped writing novels, or either they passed away. So the novel kind of became stagnant, whereas the short story continued to thrive in Malaysia. But the novel really struggled. Yeah, that's basically in general, yeah.
Do you have such kind of newspaper literature? Like we in Indonesia have that Sastra koran. Like when your words getting published in the newspaper, you will be known as a writer. So most of the writers in Indonesia will start their career from the newspaper.
Yeah, I think in Malaysia, the reason why the short story continues to strive from the beginning all the way until now, because there's always a platform for short story writers to publish their work. Similar, I think in Indonesia you have koran, Tempo, and so on. So in Malaysia, back then there was so many newspapers, magazines that you could just start anywhere as a short story writer. Even now, even though there are people don't read newspaper that much anymore, you can go online. So I think short story writers never had an issue because there was always many line of tradition. If you want to write realistic story, you can go in that direction. If you want to write something more like Kafka or something more in the Indonesian line, you can also go in that direction. So, but I think the form that kind of struggled in Malaysia was always been poetry, I think. So poetry never had that many kind of lines of tradition compared to, I think Indonesia has more dynamic in terms of poetry. But like I said, the novel kind of struggled past 2000s, so, but the short story is the one that has continued to bring out many new young writers. So if you go to Malaysia today, you look at the list of young writers today, mostly are short story writers and poets. There's no new novelists coming out yet because there are many factors influencing that. But if you look at all these young writers, they write very, very different from the previous generation. They're no longer necessarily addressing any of the national agenda, because I think you have writers coming from many places as well. You have writers coming from Borneo. You have writers who migrated outside of the country. So it has become a very diverse literature, not longer confined to national agenda. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Later, maybe we will discuss about how the technology or the globalized world will, have an influence to its writers in Southeast Asian nations. Okay, maybe now I would like to hear from Sigrid from the Philippines.
Hello. Right. Salamat malam. Good evening, everyone. I would like to start with an admission that it wasn't until later in life when I became familiar with the Philippine canon outside of Jose Rizal, right? And I think it has a lot to do with where I grew up, where I'm from, and it also informs a lot of the stories that I write. So I'm from Zamboanga City. It's southwest, right? So Barat Daya di Filipina. 13th, 14th century, our original name was actually Jambangan, which was given, I think, by the Malay settlers, right, to refer to the city that's full of flowers. It evolved to Sambuangan, and then when the Spaniards came, they had a hard time pronouncing Sambuangan, so eventually it became Zamboanga. Right, and then growing up in the 90s, so in the Philippines, there's this huge chain of bookstores, right? A national bookstore. We didn't have that back in my hometown. The books that I ended up reading were whatever I could find from the really, really weird secondhand bookstores. So you'd see philosophy books from Immanuel Kant alongside Sidney Sheldon, all the B-level romance and the romance with the suspicious book cover. And I grew up not having categorization of books. I was just hungry for reading, so I read literally whatever I could get my hands on, which might not be a good thing, but my parents didn't supervise what I was reading, right? So I was reading Le Guin, Sidney Sheldon, Lawrence Sanders, all these, things, authors that you might not be too proud of declaring in your literature classes. And then when I read eventually Jose Rizal in high school, it was in translation, right? I mean, in English rather. I read the English version because in Zamboanga, our hometown language is Chavacano, which is a Spanish-based Creole. I speak and I can read 8 other Philippine languages, including Tagalog, Filipino, but I'm not fluent enough to attempt literary writing in those languages, right? So I like default to English. I can write in Chavacano, however, it will be a matter of like circulation issue because only 2 cities in the Philippines speak the language, so readership is very low. Right, so I was born and raised in Southwest Philippines and then eventually got educated in the center in Metro Manila. So that's where I got exposed to the Philippine literary canon, etc. I think in terms of anthologizing a good representative, right, of pre-colonial, Spanish, Japanese, American, and then post-American, I don't think there's a an anthology that does it like with good methodology in anthologizing it. So I think I want to look at institutions that kind of have a say on who's who in Philippine literary scene, right? So if you look at the national, you've mentioned earlier that you have also your roster of national awards for literature. Of the 19, only 1 is a woman. And they're mostly from, well, Metro Manila. Of course, there are a few who are also not from Metro Manila, but like Metro Manila adjacent, so also from Luzon, right? So yeah, I think it's a glaring, this canonization, coming up with a list of, literature that's best representative of your country. I think it can also be a practice of erasure, right? And because most of later on, the canon literature that I've read were, produced from Metro Manila or Luzon, I felt it was landlocked. I grew up in, a peninsula, an island city, so the ocean, the sea really informs like how I live. My grandparents were fishermen who traveled from one coastal town to another, from Visayas to Mindanao, until they eventually settled in Zamboanga. So like for me to read a national literature without the water, it's very strange, right? Of the writers in English in the Philippines that I've read, I think it was H.R. Lonimo, an anthropologist who wasn't even Filipino, right? Who wrote about the Sulu Islands. That was my first encounter with, I think, something that could be passable for, the canon that I felt like represented because it had water and islands and, the interconnectedness of movements of itinerant fisher folks. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting that you said that you started reading Jose Rizal when you were in high school. I mean, like you didn't start it in elementary school. I mean, like, yeah. And the second one, you mentioned about your native the island, I mean, like the southwest part of Philippines, and also the centralized literature, which is always started in Metro Manila, and maybe that's why you wrote your debut short story collection about Laut, yeah. And maybe you can tell us more about. You mentioned about the difference between the sea and the land. I mean, if decentralized fiction from Metro Manila always mentioning about the land only, and you found it's interesting when the writer that you found later on is also, talking about the sea and land. Maybe you can mention about the names in the canon. Also, one more thing, maybe about the female writer that you mentioned earlier in 19. Yeah.
So from the national, but that's also a different thing. Okay, anyway, where do I begin? Right, so, hold on, sorry, what was that again? What's the first part?
The first one, so the literature, the canon in Philippines is so much about the land. So it started and centralized in Metro Manila, and then later on you found that some writers also wrote about the land and the sea, and you found it interesting because that's also your calling. Yeah.
I think I wanted to clarify a little bit, right? I'm referring to writers who write in English, although if you look at writers who write in other regional languages, they are also very much preoccupied with the sea as well. Another National Artist Awardee, although he was awarded posthumously, is Ramon Monzones. He was from he wrote in Hiligaynon, so a language spoken in Central Philippines, and it's like Game of Thrones in a fictive Mindanao state. So that's his preoccupation, right? But yeah, he was awarded posthumously. I think there is an effort made towards including more. For instance, now in the recent call for national awards, 2 prominent names are also women writers. So Luwalhati Bautista, who wrote Dekada 70 of what life was like under the Marcos dictatorship, and then Merly Alunan, also another poet, translator, and based also in Central, so also not from Manila, and also another woman writer. So there is, I think, like strides made to sort of not necessarily canceling who was already, there, but like making the table longer so that more writers could join in and be representative of the literary landscape. Yeah.
And the female writer, the women writer name.
Oh, Edith Tiempo, right? So, okay, so we gained independence from the U.S. in 1946, right? Physical independence. They still intervene a lot in our stuff. But interestingly, the following year, they offered a scholarship to, the husband of Edith Tiempo, Adalberto Tiempo, to join the Iowa Writers Workshop. And then the year after, Edith Tiempo was also offered the same scholarship. So they did the Iowa program, they returned to the Philippines, and then established, if I recall correctly, right, it's the Asia's longest running workshop, the Silliman University National Writers Workshop. But I guess it's an tricky thing to navigate, right? This workshop became the rite of passage of most writers in the Philippines. If you look at the list of the national awards for literature, most, if not all of them, have been a part of the workshop, right? I think it's just interesting that, of course, because they were trained in Iowa, the kind of aesthetics and pedagogy that they brought back to the Philippines are also, knowledge produced from the U.S. So while we are free from U.S. occupation independently, I think to some extent our minds, our creative imagination remained captive. Mm.
One last question before we move to Ziggy. The same question to Azrek. Is the writer in your country, should they start or write from the newspaper? I mean, should they write in the newspaper to be known as a writer in your country? Before moving to Ziggy,
I'm so sorry, I'm black.
Yeah, the last question to you. Should the writer in your country, in the Philippines, write in the newspaper? Do you have the newspaper writer kind of thing?
So Muzones, I mentioned earlier, right, the posthumously awarded writer. His work was actually serialized in a local magazine, newspaper, and then it was compiled into a novel. But not necessarily newspapers, but there are journals, magazines that local writers submit to, and yeah, the usual suspects. Mostly affiliated with universities. Although there are also some independent efforts to have, more writers outside of academia.
Thank you. Okay. Then to Ziggy, maybe. I need you to maybe explain a little more to us, the audience here, although we are in Indonesia, maybe about how you get influenced by the canon here in Indonesia, and then how you started your career as a writer.
I don't. I'm like Sigrid. I'm not exposed to literary canon until much, much later. When I first heard of canon, I think it was probably 2017, so it's quite recent. And I was stupid. I still am kind of stupid, but back then I thought, when I heard the word cannon, I didn't know what it means, so I thought it was a weapon. Because I went, because I went through a weapon obsession era. It was because I went to Malaysia, actually, in 2009. I saw this. I went to Terengganu and I saw a museum that showed very gorgeous ornamental hand cannons. So I was obsessed. So I thought, wow, literature has a weapon. And I got really disappointed that it cannot be fired. But I'm still trying to work my way into trying to understand literary canon in Indonesia, and because people are saying that what literary canon means is supposed to be the ones that are being taught in school, right? But you went to school, and we were only taught like 2 titles, and one is probably Era Kartini, Habis Gelap Terbitlah Terang, and the other would be Khairil Anwar, Aku, and that's the only ones we know. So I think we weren't really exposed to literary canon unless we look for it. And back then when we were growing up, we were all 90s kids, right? When we were growing up, we didn't really, it's kind of challenging, I think, we didn't have as much channel to look up sources of, or like synopsis or list of titles. So knowing what to look for and knowing the titles of what's called a canonized literature classics from Indonesia is actually something that's very, very niche. And I think it can only be done when you're living in Java, I think, because you have more library, you have archival, and we didn't have that. And what we have in a school library probably isn't really fiction materials, and even if we do, it would be, at least for me, it would be locked in a glass shelf, and I have to ask over and over again, can I open it, because I'm such a slow reader, and it's really embarrassing every time I have to go up to the librarian. You still haven't finished? No. And
What book do you read that time? What
I
book
forgot,
did you? Okay.
but I didn't like it so much. So it's better forgotten. And so I think a lot of us weren't really exposed to that. And I think upon exposure, I also wasn't really, still wasn't really influenced by that, because, well, I can't be bothered, can I? And I think how it developed into my, because I started writing quite early. My first publication was when I was 15. So I have been literally a writer for half my life. And I published way before I know Indonesian literature. And the thing is also, because it's much harder to find classics, Indonesians, than translations or contemporary works, mainstream popular books. It's so difficult to find classics. If it's because it's no longer reprinted, no longer reproduction. There's no longer reproduction to that. It's usually left to die for some reason. There has been a race of republication nowadays, so that's really good. But back then it was really difficult. And when you find it, it's kind of in a deteriorating state. So you have to open it like really, really carefully, because it might just fall on your hand, turn it to dust. I think when I encountered that, there were lots of things that I found to be difficult for me to feel emotionally connected with, because I think it influenced how literature, or just literature now is kind of formed. People had to write about history, politics, local wisdom, what have you, and it's not something that I can write. It's not something that I like to read, and so it cannot be a part of my writing. I always regretted that I was never introduced to Iwan Simatupang much earlier, because Ziarah was so good. Read Ziarah, please. It's such an absurdist, and it's very emotional, and it's very, I don't know, it's just very fantastic work. And Danarto, fuck. I cannot curse, right? Danarto was a very, very weird, very creepy, and it's just a very, his reality is just weird, like talking flowers, people throwing babies. Like, I needed that. Had it been, you should read Donato, fantastic writer. And had it been introduced to me during my teenage years, probably I would have loved classics so much had I known that there are so many alternatives from marriage stories and I don't know. And I cannot understand the whole Siti Nurbaya thing, you know, you being, I don't know, coupled by someone else, and I thought, can't she just say no? It's not that easy, apparently. So I cannot really understand the whole thing. A lot of things in classics, it's not something that I can grasp. So it doesn't really influence my writing. So when you're talking about how you work against that as well, I didn't work against that, because to work against it, first of all, you have to know that it exists. So I'm just doing my stuff, and apparently it's not what people used to do. But I also have a problem with the word national identity and how it's a part of national literature. But because I'm a part of this nation, so my identity is a part of this nation. So I think we are kind of caught up in a certain period. Probably people are thinking of people from the 60s or 50s or 40s are the ones that kind of hails national identity, but identity is quite dynamic. It changes every day. We ourselves as a human being, when we're exposed to an experience, a new insight, a new knowledge, we change. Our identity change, our interests change. So I think national identity is supposed to encompass everybody. We cannot really represent everyone, but we have to. We should have been able to. So I don't think I'm writing something that is not a part of national identity. I think I'm writing it. It's just that a lot of people doesn't want to admit that people in my age is exposed a lot to foreign movies, and therefore we have that kind of connection to, and probably younger generations are more connected to, I don't know, maybe we have more borderlessness. And that's actually a part of our national identity. So I don't believe that I'm writing against national identity, because the nation has to admit that I'm a part of them. So yeah.
Yeah, so earlier you mentioned about how boring, I mean, the testimony of the boringness of the ennui that you found from
boring.
No, you didn't say it as boring, but you didn't finish it, and you read it very, like, when you returned the book to the library, and they found out that you read it for a longer time, and you couldn't want to, and you couldn't find or recall the name of the writer, and then later on you mentioned that
I cannot recall because I have bad memory.
Okay.
Something to do with that.
Yeah, but then later on you mentioned about we have a very great writers like Danarto or Iwan Simatupang, and you wanted, I mean, like, you imagine what if you read it much earlier, what sort of writer would you be today? Like, it's very interesting. I mean, let's just answer that. If you read that, I mean, all those writers earlier, Danarto, anyone, Simatupang, would you rather choose to be a writer with a more political or social political voice, like you mentioned?
I think I am having a social political voice. It's just not as blatant. It's just not as pronounced, probably because I'm really scared. I'm really scared of Indonesian government. We should be scared. And that's why I kind of kept all my criticisms under layers and layers of sugarcoats. People thought I was writing for children. I was actually doing something else. And I just didn't want government to know what I was talking about. So I think had I been introduced much earlier to Iwan Simatupang and Danarto, it wouldn't have changed the way I write, but it would have changed the way I read, I think. I would look for much more Indonesian literature rather than just absorbing what I can find in front of me.
And the second one, like the other writers I asked about, did you start to write fiction, I mean, like, to publish it to the newspaper outlet, or you choose maybe to any website? In our generation, we know, like, certain website like kemudian.com or some sort.
Like what.com?
Kemudian.com.
Okay, I don't know. I didn't, because I cannot write short stories. And I think I cannot really connect newspapers with short stories because I'm not really a newspapers reader. I read headlines, and I got terrified. That's why I'm kind of like, oh, stay away from me. But I'm not exposed to Sastra koran, so it was difficult for me, I think, to be acknowledged as a real writer in Indonesia. So I kind of took a shortcut. That's why I did novel DKJ, because otherwise people won't take me seriously. Look what I've been writing. Would you have taken me seriously? Like talking cats? Does that say something about politics? No. So I think I'm kind of trying my own way to get out of that stereotypes that you have to start in a certain place, write in a certain way. But I also don't acknowledge that as a standard of how things work in Indonesia. It's just that how things work for certain people.
Yeah, thank you, Ziggy. Okay. Next, to Sabda Armanyo, the same question. How did you start your writing career? I mean, did you start from newspaper or from any website before?
Thank you, Mimi. It's kind of hard question because first off, I never planned to be like this. I never thought that I would write like what I write today, because I grew up in a kind of poor family that got hit hard during 1998 riots, and my mom was a domestic worker and dad was an electrical engineer with a sidekick fixing electronics. Our living room is just look more like a junkyard than a place where human beings should be. So my dad kept all broken stuff there. As a kid, I was scared to go outside, so I spent most of my time with my grandpa or in that cluttered living room. That was where I met my first love. It's a TV.
I thought it's a computer.
No, it's a television. It's a CRT televisions, I think. I spent my childhood glued to it, watching everything I could. And yeah, if you guys remember the mid-90s and early 2000s, I think, there were tons of cartoons and international programs on televisions. I consume everything, like literally everything, like from anime, music programs, and I think news and stock market news. I think, yeah, because I don't have any choice. That's where I get all the early concept about storytelling, character design, and all my what if. All my what if ideas is started there. And my love for TV eventually got replaced by a computer, and I think my early influences in the internet phase is Douglas Adams, Asimov, and Arthur C. Clarke. Then I met a great writer like Ursula Le Guin, new ideas from Garcia Marquez, and some weird Japanese writer. It was shows like Doraemon and Dragon Ball, I think, and Futurama. I love Futurama so much, that taught me stories. The stories could and should be more than just that. They should be smart, colorful, opinionated, and driven by both story and characters. So the real reason why I choose this form of writing is because it naturally evolved from my experience. It's just something that I was always drawn to the weird and the freaks. Something like writing sci-fi, speculative fictions, and weird fictions became my way of channeling all those ideas I accumulated over the years. Like some says I'm to focus on the structure and I'm not writing from my heart. But yeah, they might be right, I don't know. But all I know is that this is how I express what I feel and think. So when I have readers, it makes me happy, because it turns out that through fiction I found my way to communicate with others. Like something I used to struggle with a lot, like something like that.
Well, when you explain about yourself, and also Sigi and other explain about how starting career in writing world, I started to think that our generation somehow has the similar silver lining, like aren't we all? But to think about it, why did it actually happen? I mean, like when we mention about the canon, when we mention about the government imposed the canon in school to be taught to the children, and also about the newspaper. I mean, writers who used to be and who must write in the newspaper to be known as an authoritative author. I mean, like, we know all the history from our previous writers. But most of us, especially writers here, sitting here now, choose to have different path. Why do you think this happened? I mean, do the institution no longer work, or do the gatekeeper feel like it's too much for our generation? What's your opinion about that? When our generation see most of the institution as the gatekeeper, rather than, well, it's to keep the tradition, so we have to learn from the previous writers. We have to read our writers' ancestors. Sounds like. Maybe now we can start from Sigrid.
Right. Right. So the stories in my book, right? Now I'm thinking like they first appeared online before I eventually collected them into a book. Some stories found themselves in genre magazines, like just shameless, this is a genre story. But some stories are also in, well, literary journals. When I wrote the stories, my main preoccupation, as I've mentioned earlier, was, the sea. Because I felt like it's a glaring, like it's lacking, right, in Philippine literature. So like, it was a deliberate choice to explore the ocean as a method of interrogating personal histories, hyperlocal histories, gentrification and displacement of coastal communities, etc. So these were my thematic preoccupations. But like when a story comes to me, it's not like, it screams, you have to write this in a realism way, or like you have to write this with magical elements, or like with hovering spacecrafts for it to be sci-fi. There's usually this thematic like preoccupation, and then it really depends, right? So some stories found themselves in genre magazines. Other stories found themselves in literary magazines. So kind of like straddling two worlds. I think like I want to also like circle back to what I said earlier about, coming from Zamboanga and not feeling like, I'm also like careful with how I navigate that, because this regionalism or tribalism has been also weaponized, right, to pit us against each other, forgetting that there are bigger power structures that continue to oppress, everyone, regardless of which region you're from. So I guess my way of connecting, forming solidarities, right, with the literary ancestors is, like as mentioned in the earlier panel, finding this interconnectedness within our history. So for example, when I grew up, I grew up thinking that, the EDSA revolution that eventually toppled the dictator Marcos, it was just a Manila thing, right? But we also actually suffered under martial law regime, right? The peace and order in Mindanao is a direct consequence of what the people in Malacanang, right, in the seat of power, were doing. Our former city mayor, Climaco, was actually assassinated because he was very vocal about what the regime was doing in Zamboanga. He had he displayed in the city center the number of extrajudicial killings done during that time, and he made this public declaration that he wouldn't cut his hair until Marcos is out of power. Eventually, he was assassinated, right? So I think I also want to, aside from represent Zamboanga, also, I cringe at suddenly representing. No, I don't think anyone should have a monopoly of stories of any specific region, right? The goal is to have, again, more writers, decentralized storytelling, but I digress. I think I just want to realize, right? So aside from that, also when we were taught about the Philippine Revolution, like if you look at the Philippine flag, the 8 rays are actually the provinces in Luzon who were active in the revolutionary movement. But we also had revolutionaries from back home. General Vicente Alvarez, even people from my own hometown do not know that we also had the Katipunero revolutionary. So I think it's that, like aside from, hey, we're here, also our histories are actually connected. Yeah. Wait, did I answer the question?
Yeah, so basically you don't have any problem in the Philippines about, to see the institution as the literary gatekeeper. You don't have that problem. As you mentioned earlier, so there are writers who wrote in genre fictions and some writers who wrote in literary form, so that's fine for you. In general, in the Philippines, it's also no problem with the literary gatekeepers, right?
I would say that there are, certain types of literature that would appeal more to, the award-giving bodies, etc. And most of these are stories that are social realism, right? So it has that political preoccupation, etc. There is that, but also I know writers who kind of don't write within that stream have also created alternate modes of, creating spaces for other types of stories. So I don't think it's necessarily this side versus that side, but more opening up, the table and then having more voices, more ways of telling a story. Yeah.
That's nice, the kind of understanding, like you have your own way, I have my own way, that kind of thing. Okay.
I think just to add on
Yes,
what
Azrik,
she said,
please.
yeah. I think the canon is something that is constantly rewritten, so because you can see sometimes there are writers who at one time might not be a prominent author, then later on is something that comes back to the surface. Like for example, Naruto was a big writer during the 80s, then he kind of fade away, and then he is read again, and you see Iwan Simatupang now being republished. But then you have writers like one of my favorite Indonesian poets like Subagio. I think very hard to find his books. I only read his poems through libraries. I have to go to a library to read his poems, but for me, he is one of the best, the top 3 poets in Indonesia, but to find his book is almost impossible. And so I think the canon is made of many layers, and it is always constantly moving and fluid, So, for example, there's one of the most controversial figure and one of the most important figure in Malaysian literature and Singapore literature is Munshi Abdullah. So Munshi Abdullah is considered the founder of modern Malaysian literature and also in Singapore. But he's a very controversial figure because he criticized the royal family. He is very vocal about the Malay people. But at the same time, when he wrote Hikayat Abdullah, Kisah Pelayaran ke Kelantan and Terengganu, it was considered a very revolutionary way of writing, because during the 19th century, to write from a first-person perspective about your race, about what was going on in Malacca, in Singapore, it was seen as something radical. And even until now, he is constantly supported by certain group and opposed by certain groups. So he is constantly reread and constantly rewritten. So one moment he's in the canon, and then he's outside the canon, and he's in the canon again. So I think that is something that we must always be aware that when you are a writer, the entry point into the so-called literature can come from many windows. Yeah. Let's forget about national literature for a moment. Think about world literature, the world canon, or even the Western canon. When you think about world literature, you think about the big names, Shakespeare, James Joyce, Tolstoy. But underneath that, there's so many other minor writers from many countries that in the 20th century was a bit difficult to find, but now through translation work, through small publishing house like New Directions, Dalkey Archives, you began to see more writers that you could have never have read back then, Yeah, like for example, weird fiction. I also like weird fiction, and there's one writer from the UK, Robert Aikman. He is a very unique kind of short story writer, very different from what we usually think of horror writing or weird fiction writing, and yet only late now that he is discovered. During the 20th century, he was quite relatively unknown. So when you go as a writer into literature, there's always many entry points. And I think that is where I think the idea of national agenda is something that, for example, sorry, the idea of national identity is something that is not close to me, because when I read literature, I identify with the author that I'm reading. So if I'm reading a French writer, I'm a French reader at that time. So if I'm reading Nosgard from Norway, I'm Norwegian at that time, because there's always themes, emotions, ideas, stories, that transcends national boundaries. So where you read is where your nationality is, So the most important thing is when you are a reader and a writer is to become the citizen of literature. When you read, you become part of that tradition that moves beyond where you were born first. Of course, you cannot escape from your national identity, but to be part of that world literature, I think, is something that every writer strives for, even though it is quite challenging in itself. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting when you actually highlight giving the context about the canon. At one time, the canon might be work, but another time it might be not relevant at all for the next generation, maybe. And also how you actually explored about when the national agenda, actually you want to have your identity as well as, as a Malaysian in your writing, but how is your strategy to keep it balanced, whether to still keep your national identity in your work and also wanting to explore more about, like you mentioned about the more global citizenship in your work. To have this duality in the work. What's your strategy to make that balance?
I think it's to constantly see how other writers from around the world engage with ideas that is going on in the world. Because I think if you want to develop your talent and the way you think as a novelist, you have to read the writers of your century. Of course, you can learn from the previous generation, from the classic, but to really learn how to think today as a novelist, you need to engage with the writers of today. You need to look at what is going on the world stage. See, for example, what is autofiction? Like autofiction is a big genre in the West right now. Is that something that I can learn or something that I can relate? Then you look to the Americans, you go to the Latin Americans, they all think in a different way. So how can I take something from the Borges tradition, from the Argentinians? What can I learn from the Americans? So because in the end, as writers and human beings, we are always engaging with the similar ideas. The ideas of love, death, family. It happens across all over the world. That's why we can read books from the 18th century. That's why we can read Shakespeare even until today, because there are ideas that moves across time. So I think as a writer, we should not confine ourselves just to our tradition. We need to look, because literature has been around for a long time. The novel has been around for such a long time. We need to think bigger, not just think about, okay, if I'm a Malaysian writer, what can I offer as a Malaysian writer only? You have to think like, as a novelist, what can I offer that hasn't been done on the world stage? If the American have done Infinite Jest, if the Norwegian has done My Struggle, if the Japanese has done this novel and this novel, what can we as Indonesian, as Malaysian, or as Southeast Asian writers, novelists, offer to world literature that hasn't been done before? Yeah.
Very nicely explained. Thank you, Azrik. Maybe next to Sabdarman, you.
There's some interesting points from Azrik and Sigrid. I think, we kind of agree that canons are kind of exclusive by nature. So, which means we miss out on a lot of different perspectives and underrepresented texts. That's what is important is, if you think that's okay, surely there is something wrong with you. But it's only fair if you admit that to public. Hey, we make some list, like listicle articles, 10 great writers you should read before you die or something like that. But I make this list for you because I need to maintain my powers, my upon you. I think it's only fair because so public can decide they want to read it or not, they want to like it or not. I think the problem with lying in canonized lit is they are not really transparent about their goals. I think something like that, because now with the internet we have access to so much more of the world's written stuff that wasn't possible in Orde Baru. So yeah, in this decentralized system, I'm not sure if lit canons are even relevant today. They might just end up being a waste of time and money or embarrassing project if they try to force it. Does the lit canon have the major influence? Of course it does, but that's the main point of canon, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and as we know that you also explore in your writing, I mean, like the many forms of genre. You wrote Mongrel with the climate fiction genre and so many other type of writing you explore in, yeah. And how actually do you find it, the calling to write in such form? In climate fiction and detective genre stories, why did you choose to pick those genre when you mentioned that, well, there are these listicles about 10 fantasy writers to be read, 10 kind of, yeah. How did you find it?
It's simply because I'm too paranoid. Because there's a lot of going on my mind, and I cannot express it the way I talk to friends. I don't have many friends, so this kind of fear of the end of the world, like we destroy our natures and so on and so forth, and we can. I think we cannot stop it. There's something strong in my mind that I don't want to be a doomer generations, but I think it's because a fear I have for the next generations, because I believe we should survive like for 1,000 years down, but I don't think I think this is where I come from.
Yeah, but what is interesting from your writing is you are not giving the readers the fear mongering, the nuances about fear mongering, but you rather give the alternatives. You have the issues about common, about how people can be in the common and how to make a community better, and that's what I found interesting in your writing.
Hey, thank you.
Okay, next to Ziggy. The same question, how do you see or perceive the literary gatekeepers? Do you have any comments about that while our generation have that issue with the literary gatekeepers?
I cannot say for young generations or our generations. I can only say for myself, but the truth is I don't really care. The truth is why I did not do Sastra, Quran and other things like that is because I'm writing the way I want to write. I'm doing it for fun. I'm not doing it for noble reasons, to better future generations, to better our nations. I don't think that. I'm a very selfish prick. Can I say that? I'm sorry. It's past 7.
That is what?
And I think I'm very different from Azrik because I kind of absorb things from my mom especially, and we are very navel-gazing persons. And I think as a writer, that's the only thing that I could do. I'm not that insightful, I'm not that knowledgeable, I'm not that smart. And what I know is what's happening around me. And I found that what's been happening around me, domestic abuse, sexual abuse, child abuse, it's happening around the world. So what I've been writing, even though it's based on things that I write, things that I see around me, only very domestically, not in my house, but around my house, it's something that people can also relate to, regardless where they are. I kind of reflect that on when we're talking about in Ruang Perempuan dan Tulisan, we were talking about how male writers write about war, and it seemed like it's something that's that we all feel is something that's very general, unifying. It represents all of us. But when women are writing about something that's domestic, how the war affects their lives in the house, they think it's very subjective. They think of it as something that is autobiographical and therefore doesn't really represent us as a nation. But it's something that's real, that's been happening, that's been felt by a lot of housewives, a lot of mothers, a lot of women. So it's actually a general experience. So I think I'm not saying that Azrik is wrong, obviously, but I'm saying there's another way to perceive how to work with our writing, and it's okay for us to just write our experiences that's happening around us, because it's always based off something that hasn't been resolved, and it needs resolving. So I think it's as important as what's happening around the world, because it's actually happening around the world. And when we're talking about literary gatekeepers, and again, I said I don't really do that, because I think our generations is really, I don't like saying that, our generations, but I think a lot of us are kind of doing things for ourselves, and probably some of us are thinking about getting into the power, but I think a lot of us, that's the reason why we're like this. I think a lot of us are just doing this because we want to write, and I think that's completely okay. So probably that's the reason why canon felt like it didn't really touch us. But I don't agree with Dio. I don't believe that canon is bullshit, because when we're talking about canon as a part of education, I think it's easy. It makes it easier for educators to teach, because when they're working on a certain list, that's kind of, that's when they have a list, they have the ability to know which ones, and they don't have to explore too far, and therefore I think they can master the subjects more easily, and therefore can teach it more easily. And I think what happens after that is it depends on the students. But I think it's for education. I think it's quite purposeful. There is a purpose there. Just because I think it doesn't work on us. I think there are some people that still find it beneficial, and I think when it comes to institutionalized education, I think it's fine to have a list or to have a guide. I think it's not really a list; it's a guide. So what I'm thinking is that we have been trying to teach students to love literature, but we never try to teach teachers to love literature. So the teachers cannot teach, because what we're learning in school is how to know the Indonesian grammars, which one is kalimat majemuk, and stuff like that. I still don't know what those are, and I don't think they do as well.
Complex sentences.
But and I think they don't teach us how to love reading, how to interpret what we're reading, how to feel about what we read. And I think that's why we also have to approach adults, not just the children.
I actually hope that Nadiem Makarim is here with us to hear about your explanation, because maybe the real issue is not about the student, whether the student didn't like or doesn't like the literature, but it's maybe because of the teacher who actually don't love literature. Yeah, that's very nice. And Ziggy, maybe the same question like I asked to Dio. How did you find your voice then? You mentioned that you would rather to write about your surroundings, your environment, the many local. Rather than going to the broader things that's very far away from you. But how did you find the voice? Who influenced you? Do you have some writers that have the same alignment or inclination like you?
That's the way I write is actually the way I speak in daily life. So actually I just write the way I know how. And I think when it comes to influences, I'm not well read. I'm gonna say that I'm not well read, because I read, I don't know, I don't read classics, not Indonesian classics, not really foreign classics. Haven't. I'm still processing. As I said, I'm a slow reader. I'm still processing all that. But I read a lot of manga, and we had a lot of that, and it's kind of cheaper than novels. But other than that, I think the reasons why I don't really read classics is because, first of all, I don't like lists. You don't tell me what to love, and so my favorite thing to do is to go to second-hand bookshops or libraries, or second-hand bookshops / libraries, or and just discover random books. Sometimes I love them so much, and the only downfall is that probably people don't know about it, and therefore I cannot gush over it. Like, then what's the title? I forgot, because I always forget the titles. But it's kind of like an adventure for readers, and I think that's the most joyful thing that you can do as a reader, is to set yourself on your own adventure and find something that you love. Not necessarily because people said you should love it, but because you just read it and you find it's really, really great. So I think I have a lot of random excerpts of things I couldn't buy, no money, and probably something that I've already forgotten, but a part of it kind of got stuck into me. So.
Yeah, so that shows you are an avid reader. Okay, we have talked here about the national literature, the canon, and also the institution working, imposing the national canon literature to our students. As we are now actually in the panel, and most of our audiences here would really love it to hear about more regional issues about the Southeast Asian nation issues. Maybe I would like to ask a question to all of you here about, do you have any idea what sort of regional literature that we can actually imagine to have? Like in Latin America, they have the boom movement or some sort of magical realism fiction. And when we talk about decision about seeking to move beyond national literature, it means that, like what Ziggy mentions, maybe just find our local or surroundings, and the next to us, the very close to us is the regional literature itself. Do you have any imagination about what regional literature should be? Or maybe you can also mention any writers from any nationalities in the Southeast Asian nation that you guys read and love. Okay, maybe we can start from Dio.
I involved in this online forum called SGV Foundations. It's for monsters and something like that. I think it's a good idea to make a community like that in Southeast Asia regions. Like we can, I know, we have so many mythology, we have so many tales, we have so many stories. One thing I should mention that I don't dismiss all the works, the cultural works from my friends. Obviously, it's just this idea of universal humanism from Ayatu that bothers me so much. I really hate that he wants to develop our art is like European cultures and the art for the art's sake only, and I think with more community involved, we should make some kind of database from our regions, and I know it's something like that. I think it's kind of cool ideas. I know.
Who is your favorite writer from other Southeast Asian nation?
I read that Zocho from Malaysia. Zencho from Malaysia. I read here. I don't think I remember from where I read, but it's like some kind of journal from speculative fictions collections, I think, and from Philippines too. There is a speculative journal from Philippines, but I don't remember the title.
Next time you should make the database.
yeah, something like.
Thank you, Dio. And then next to Azrik.
I think to go into a kind of, when we compare our region with Latin American, where like in Latin America is very clear, like they all look to one single origin, which is Cervantes, Don Quixote, and they go to John Rulfo, and then maybe the boom generation, Marquez. They react to those generations because they all share the same language, Spanish. So it's easier for them to communicate with each other, and it's easier for them to kind of benchmark themselves. Okay, this is our heritage, this is our literature. How do we move from there? Whereas here it is more complicated because you have many languages, many traditions, and only now that we start to communicate with each other, to start reading with each other. I think from the previous generation, it is very insular, whether it's from Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia. Everyone was just reading in very limited space, you know, like Malaysian, they read a lot of Indonesian they read some of Malaysian, but it is not as extensive as now, because now it's easier to get books. Like Malaysians can just go to Shopee and buy books from Indonesia, and we can just communicate with each other through online. You know, even though we never met each other. You know, like I met Mansor first through online communication. Same with Eka Kurniawan. We shared comments on his blog, and he commented on my blog, and then eventually we do meet. And so I think the gap, I think, is slowly becoming more closer and easier to travel. Like you see, like I'm here in Jakarta, you know. So this is a kind of communication that was very hard to do back then, you know. So it's a good starting point where we need to start reading each other, and only from there can you start kind of to build a kind of communication about developing a Southeast Asian identity, you know, because we don't know yet, you know, where do we stand? Where do we stand on the heritage of writers from Thailand or Vietnam? Do we stand with from our side of the world, you know, from Nusantara side, you know? So because in the end we all share quite similar, you know, when you travel to the cities around Southeast Asia, there you see similar surroundings, similar food, similar culture. Definitely, you know, if we can find a kind of form or structure or literary tradition that can unite that, I believe it can work. You know, it's just it is so many obstacles. You know, like when you think of Vietnamese, Thailand, you know, so different from people from this side of the world, from Malaysians, Singaporeans, and we don't know. You know, like I don't know what's really going on. For example, in the Philippines, who are the best writers in Philippines? Who is considered like the best novelist living today? You know, there should be that kind of communication, and because you need people, the best writers from every nation, to be together and read each other. Only from there can you really kind of, if you really want, you know, to kind of create of a sea image, Southeast Asian image. And right now it is still kind of segregated in a way, you know. But I think that that is a starting point. But most importantly, I think we need to also think bigger, I think, as a writer in this region, and not just limit ourselves to, like I said earlier, to our own nationality. We have to believe that what we have is something that is relevant to readers from anywhere, you know. We have to come out of this mindset that we need to be more like the Americans, or need to be more like the Europeans, we need to be more like the Japanese. Yes, they've been there longer, you know, their literature, their modern literature has been there longer. We have just achieved independence like in the 20th century. But we have our own mythology, our own culture, our own history, things that we want to say, whether it's from the biggest agendas to the smallest things happening in our house, the things that are happening at the coffee shop. Our food is different, our people is different, our music is different. All those things are materials to develop a strong regional identity. We just need to believe and start to think ourselves as being part of a larger world literature, and not just Malaysian, Indonesian, Singaporean, Thailand writers. Yeah.
And it will be started by reading each other and meeting each other like this. Okay, and next, oh no, one more question to Azrik. Who's your favorite writer? Maybe from the Philippines?
So, sorry, my reading of the Philippines is very limited, so I don't have a favorite writer. There's one unique writer from Brunei, actually. I can't remember his name, but his book I remember is called A4. I discovered that book in the library. It is published by Dewan Bahasa Brunei. In the 90s, but it is so avant-garde. I was so blown away by the form of that novel. It's just about a person working in an office, like a set of fragments, and he uses the image of an A4 paper repeatedly. So for
like
me,
Kafka.
that was a very unique discovery, because I don't know that much about Brunei literature, but to discover that out of nowhere and to know that it was published in the early 90s, it was so amazing. So that is one writer. But from Indonesia, there's so many. There's so many writers from Indonesia. I think for me, when you talk about influence, I have many layers of influence. They are things that I grew up, my childhood, like video games, PC games, the comics of Tintin. Those are things that shape my imagination in the background. And then there are writers that I admire as a person, their life, like Virginia Woolf. I translate her work, but she doesn't influence me as a writer. She influenced me in terms of her life, the way she sees the world. Then there are writers that do influence my writing, like Bolano, Cesar Aira, many writers. So when we talk about influence, it's an organic thing for a writer. It comes and goes, and it changes over time, So from the region, when I want to polish my language, I go to Indonesians, because I think Indonesian poetry is so dynamic. So I can go to Adamanso.
Mention some names maybe.
Yeah, Adamanso, for example. Afrizal, yeah. You go to them for the language, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Azrek. Next to Sigrid, please.
I have so many open tabs in my brain right now. I'll try to close one, like each of them one by one. You mentioned earlier about like art for art's sake, right? And then I talk about the beginning of one of the most influential workshop in the Philippines, and they sort of like imported new criticism, no? That like the text should stand on its own. It's all about formalism, the language, etc. Politics be damned, right? But I also like feel strongly against that, because no matter if like you're writing about monsters or spacecrafts or whatever magical elements, it will always be political, right? Yes, what else? Like no one writes in a vacuum. We have our personal history, we have like the bigger, picture history. So yeah, I do have stories that are sci-fi, spacecraft, first encounter, and I feel like what I wanted to do with that is that like when we think of sci-fi, it's a very colonial approach to it. It's a story of conquering new places and planets. So I wanted to subvert that and think about what a first encounter story would be like in the perspective of the ones being, first contacted by these more superior, advanced, etc. Right. So there, like even if it's spacecraft, it will always be political and within the historical landscape. What else did I wanted to address? You mentioned Brunei. My first encounter with Southeast Asian literature was also with a Brunei writer. I'm sorry, I might be wrong with the name, Catherine Mahmoud. But the title of the work is The Fisherman King. So when I was looking, actively looking for sea stories or ocean stories from the Philippines, I found it lacking, but luckily I read it from a Brunei writer. And then I guess eventually that became, I wanted to see Southeast Asia with a maritime history, but also like you've mentioned earlier, like how we converse with the rest of the world, right? So some influences, for example, Ted Chiang. I like Ted Chiang's sci-fi because it's very humanist.
But it's Chinese.
Yes, exactly. I'm a big fan.
I was asking Southeast Asian.
No, but I think I wanted to say like
okay,
he's American, right? But I think we don't have to limit like from here. There's always a way how to read stories outside of Southeast Asia, and then like sort of how do we find inspiration from it based on our own context, right? I also gain a lot of influence from the Latin American writers, the magic realism movement, that again is very much grounded in the politics of the place, right? And then from Southeast Asia, I'm a big fan of Intan Paramadita.
Abis Mbak Intan is here.
Right, the gothic noir in her writing, I feel like really resonates with me, who grew up believing in witchcraft. Right, the gothic, the ghosts. I've also read Daphne Lee from Malaysia. and Ang Ishang from Singapore. So, but I have to admit that this, discovery of Southeast Asian writers came pretty late in my life. Like last year, I was in a residency in Malaysia. I was supposed to finish the self-translation of my second collection, but I spent more time reading. So I ended up, reading more Southeast Asian writers at the expense of my own progress. But, no regrets in that one. I think it really expanded my imagination of, the interconnectedness of, the islands. Yeah.
And what's your specific imagination about how the regional literature should work?
Should, I think we all kind of like shy away from should work. Yeah, but the ones that resonate with me are the ones that would like connect us. We have like, I've mentioned ghosts. I've mentioned earlier that 14th, 13th century Zamboanga was actually founded by Malay settlers, right? Like, I think we don't know much about that. So I want to, like, for me, what interests me is that maritime history. And with the disputes going on in the West Philippine Sea, I think it's also important to have, those kind of writings out there, yeah.
Thank you, Sigrid. Okay, Ziggy, let's go. The question is, first, how do you imagine the regional literature should be? Second, which your favorite writer from the Southeast Asian nation?
I don't really imagine us as a regional, but I think, I don't know, I'm very individualistic. I like to think that, I don't know, we're a part of something, but we have the rights to just write about us individually, and I think that can resonate somehow because we have shared history, we have shared cultures, but I do like ghost stories, so I kind of imagine probably that's something that would really quickly bond us. Like, do you know the story of Pontianak? It's Pontianak. It's something that's I found that in Charlene Theo Ponti. Actually, I really love that because it started with the smell of period blood and vision of brass straps, and I thought she was really funny. And I really love the story of in Pontianak in Kalimantan, right? And how they actually heard the laughter of kuntilanak as we know it, and they would make a loud noise to scare her, and it's using cannon again. So I love cannons, and that's apparently used to scare away kuntilanak. So I really love that story, and I wish someone would have written that. And I actually did write about kuntilanak and pontianak and that story because I really love it. And there's a belief that kuntilanak is actually a sort of vampire, so I think it kind of ties them to aswang. So it's something like, it's something that we really can connect with. So when people are talking about how do you do that, my first choice was always, let's talk about ghost stories because we are all terrified of that sound of laughter. And there's one Southeast Asian writer that I really like, but I cannot really say.
Because your friend?
No, because of personal reasons. But I have written about her, and I have done
Say it.
a giveaway on my Twitter. So just go to my Twitter. I don't want to say the name. I'm really sorry, but it's for personal reasons.
Okay, it's interesting when you mention about ghost stories because lately I read fiction from Caroline Howell. So from the Philippines, she wrote some ghost stories as well about the haunted house in the Philippines, but she intertwined it with the political issues in the nation. So it's very interesting, and also horror stories or the ghost stories will be selling well when it is adapted into movie, right? Okay. So here we have a very lively discussion with the panelists here. I would like to invite maybe the audiences who have questions to raise hands. Okay, 1, 2, I need 3. Oh, 3, okay, 3. Please help me too, yeah. The first one and the second. Please mention your name and maybe your origin. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for this fascinating discussion. My name is Alfian. I'm from Singapore.
Malay sketches.
Yeah, that's right. So I believe that the discourse on national literatures took place against a context, a certain historical context, right, which is decolonization. And I'm thinking that as much as the idea of national could be seen as insular, but I think around that time, the idea of national was also post-colonial. So when you're talking about national literatures, you're also talking about post-colonial literature. And I'm thinking of that moment, in the 50s and 60s. So like in the National University of Singapore, the curriculum, they were trying to look at literatures from Africa, from India. I'm thinking of Afro-Asian solidarity, non-aligned movement, Malfindo. So all those kinds of courses. Do you feel that that moment has passed in the way that we talk about our regional literatures? Because there's this argument, okay, we've all decolonized, right? So, but then there's someone like Walter Mignolo, for example, who makes a distinction between formal decolonization and decoloniality, where he says that coloniality is the persistence of these power structures and epistemic structures and ideologies where it's the West and the rest. So I suppose my question is, as writers, do you think this project of decolonization is something that you're still interested in? And is it possible to divorce issues of decolonization from the nation state? I also was wondering about the way some of you tried to disavow that you're writing national literature, because how do you deal with that contradiction because you are writing in national languages? Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Alfian. Okay, should we, please to the next, that one sitting behind you, yeah. Okay, first one about the post-colonial literature.
Okay, thank you for the chance already given to me. So my name is Afandi, I'm from Bekasi. So far we know that Korean wave is significantly effect among our Asian countries, Asian culture. Keep in mind that we have a lot of folklore, myth, or legend stories from our countries, especially in Indonesia. So my question is, how do you embrace the Korean K-pop wave in ASEAN literature now? Thank you.
Thank you, Avandi. Okay, next from this row. Please raise hand again. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Adam from Jakarta. And I once read that the canon art or literature is also linked to the political power. And this is maybe why Korean and Chinese wave are now more recognized in the world, as mentioned also from the previous about Korean wave, something like that. And could it be that the Asian literature and art can only be recognized by the world if there is a political concern from the government? And what do you think about this? Okay. Should I?
Please repeat
question?
the last sentence.
Yeah. Could it be that the ASEAN, Asia Southeast Asian nation, literature and art can be only recognized or well known by the world or the global reader if there is a political concern from our own government, okay, or about political power? What do you think about this?
Okay, thank you, Adam.
Okay.
I think I will answer Encik Safian question first.
So we will answer,
I think my main problem with the idea of sastra kebangsaan ataupun national literature is that it tends to favors those in power or the race that benefits the most from that sastra kebangsaan. Like I'm a Malay writer, so I have kind of advantage already over other writers from other races in Malaysia because I'm in the center. The government is ruled by the Bumi Putra, the majority. So there's already a kind of power advantage for a Malay writer. But you have other writers in other languages in Malaysia, that is not recognized as part of national literature. Right? People who are writing in Mahua, writing in Tamil, even writers who are writing in English, even though they are winning awards here and there, Tan Tuan Eng, Tash O, these are international writers, but they are not seen as part of the Malaysian literary scene. So, because when you look even at the what is being taught in schools, what is seen as national laurels, it is all kind of controlled by those who are in power. And that is my main problem with trying to uphold an idea of a national literature, because I think in any nation it will favor those who are in power. True, when it came about, it was to unite everyone, to fight for independence, and it worked, because it kind of, when during 50s and 60s we were reading each other, people from Tanah Melayu were reading from Indonesia, and there was no kind of concrete idea yet what is a nation at that time, because Indonesia, Tanah Melayu, all was seen as one thing. We were all using the same language, and we were all fighting for independence. But now, post-independence, we have to not just, we are still bound by that, but we need to move away from the idea that literature needs to be bound only by national identity, because our identity, yes, we are part of a nation, we are part of a certain race, we cannot escape that, but we are also part of many other things. So if I'm a Malaysian, I'm as much as part of the Chinese, Indians, or any people, because they are part of my country. The country that I'm in is not just shaped by the Malay people, it's shaped by everyone that exists in that country. So national literature, yes, it is important, but I think it is not the end to it in itself. Yeah.
I just want to add something like I guess I mentioned earlier about Aatu and his universal humanism attitude and art for the art's sake attitude. I think the dangerous idea behind this model is, if we keep doing this today, it's pretty obvious that the same art for arts attitude is going to exclude works by queer, by revolutionary feminists, by people getting displaced for mining constructions project. Anyone who writing not just for fun like me or like Ziggy, or they write for to survive, to resist something. I think the problem is they won't get canon because maybe by Aatu standard, it's not art. It's just someone who curhat, something like that.
Okay, Sigrid and Ziggy have words for that?
I'll try to touch on the first and the third. I'm sorry about the K-pop wave. I'm kind of terminally offline, so I'm the opposite of right. So I will be borrowing from Malaysian sociologist that I read, Said Alatas, and his writing has a lot of parallels with Renato Constantino in the Philippines, right? And in I think, if I recall correctly, in the process of decolonization, there are actually three phases. You critique the dominant narrative, and then you reconstruct or deconstruct, right? And
First
then
deconstruct.
Sorry.
First deconstruct. The second.
A critique, and then deconstruct, and then
critique.
construct your own. I see this in the myth of the lazy native, and then later on it was deconstructed what it actually was, and then sort of create your own. Perhaps we can borrow from that idea in terms of literature. A lot of us kind of trained with, for example, you go into workshop class, you were taught show, don't tell, and then you often have the hero's journey of a beginning, middle, and end. But a lot of these aesthetics were, brought out by, hold on, my brain is jumping right now. Right, so show, don't tell. It's kind of a rule of someone who has a universally recognized story. But if you're, again, from the periphery, you kind of have to tell and tell and tell, because your story is not part of the universal. So I think all these kind of things that we have accepted as sort of truth of what a good writing is, it might be a good time to review them. And then also develop our own autonomous aesthetic, right? Not knowledge, but autonomous aesthetic. It's not a complete rejection of what we have learned from the West, but I think just being more critical about it, seeing which things would work within the region and what else can we add to that based on our own context, our own milieu. Which the third question had something to do with. like which part of Asian stories would have more recognition outside. Sort of similar to the question raised yesterday, like why only a few Southeast Asian stories get recognition from Booker Prize, etc. Right? Right. Geopolitics has a lot to do with this one. Sometimes they only have like one space for which type of Asian they would want to represent, and if this type of image would work with, you know, whatever alternate. So I think it might also be beneficial to perhaps like why do we want sort of like the Western approval anyway? Like, can we have, you know, excellent literature without necessarily having that stamp of approval from the West, right? Because a lot of things play into which awards are given to which authors. And really, it's not just merit. It has a lot of other factors. Like, why do 6 Swedish people decide this is great literature? So, yeah, yeah.
Thanks, Sigrid. Sige. Okay, there are 3 questions, but basically we answer only the first one about whether you embrace the post-colonial literature or the decolonization, literature about decolonization. I mean, do you still write around the issues as actually the previous writers are mainly involved in that issues?
I don't know, I think from classics, I think Indonesian literature focuses a lot on nationality and who we are as a nation and our history and what had been done to us during the occupation. But I think nowadays I'm still very much interested in that. And I've written that in Di Tanah Lada, actually. I was criticizing how much we love English. So if you know English, it means you're smart. But nobody pays attention if you're really good at Indonesian. And I think that's also a part of very, very basic type of colonialism that's still attached to us. So it's really still attached to our national identity. The reason why we really crave for Western approval. And I think that's something that I think we should still try. I don't know if others felt that way, but I really feel very annoyed by that, and I'm still really trying to address that. Probably I haven't been able to do that well enough, but it's something that I'm still really, really interested about. And what about the others?
The others, we should answer that. I think Isaac and Dio also have an answer at the second and third question. Okay, the second question about, it is about the Korean waves. So currently there is the Korean waves, Chinese waves, and all the waves around the world that we, as a globalized citizen, we read those kind of things as well. How do they influence us, or do we find our own voices to actually answer to those to those trends today?
I think it's fine to read what you want to read, because I love Bora Chung, and Chris Bunny has a lot of fantasy, sci-fi, ghost stories. The first story is actually about toilet ghosts, which is really funny, and please do not read it when you're having lunch, like I did, because it's really gross. But I think there are a lot of ways that they can also resonate to us, and I think there are a lot of ways that it can, I don't know, benefit us in a way. I don't think that we should ban ourselves from reading anything just because it comes from a certain region. I think we should be able to be liberated for that matter as well. And I love Chinese literature so much. I cannot say that I love it more than Korean. But so I think there are merits, because they are great writers. A lot of them are great writers, and I think we can enjoy it. Like, again, please do not tell us what to love. I think we are free to love anything, and probably the way we express it, that's the one that should be regulated by ourselves. But I think if you're just reading it for enjoyment, I think that's something that people tend to forget, that sometimes we read because we love to read. It's not always political. It's not always I have to read from Southeast Asian because it's a form of decolonization. Sometimes we just read because we are readers. Basically, we are readers, and we love reading. And I think we should not stop ourselves from enjoying anything.
Would you like to answer the third question as well?
I think the idea of influence of Korean culture can only be answered by Gen Z writers coming up later on. Because I think they are the ones that are getting that direct influence from the K-pop culture. So like for us in the 90s, it still was very much an American influence kind of culture. So like when Dio was saying that he was watching television, I'm sure it was mostly American pop culture, films, sitcoms. You know, at that time, Korea was very unknown during the 90s. Only later on again. So I think to really answer that, you have to look at the next generation of writers coming up. I'm sure they will have more reference from that kind of influence. So I think for this generation, it was mainly more on American or even other influences.
Okay, would you like to answer the second question as well? Okay. Actually, the third question so much related with the second question is still about there is still Korean wave, the pop culture movement today, but there is, according to him, there is a political support from the government as well so that the K-pop is known by the world. So it's because the government supporting. What do you think about your own government in your own respective countries responding to this? Do they have certain maybe like policies regarding the political agenda a bit behind the Indonesian literature or the Philippines literature or the Malaysian literature to go forth to the world?
I think when we talk about government support, I think the government will only support something that gives them power and something that makes money, I think. So literature basically is not something that would benefit any government, I think, in general. So to depend on the government, to lift our literature, of course, yes, the government will give grants and so on, but it's not something that you should be latching on to, because government can come and go, the agendas can change, the policies can change, but literature in its core will always remain the same. Writers believe in their ideas will remain the same. So I think you should stand on your work, and what you believe in, and not be hoping that our literature is going to be safe, by those in power, because power is a very, very fragile thing. It can just change in an instance, but you yourself as an individual should always remain firm and strong, regardless of who is in power.
Okay, thank you, Azri. Any other answers regarding to that? Okay, so all the answers are wrap up. Any other questions from the audiences here? Maybe we can answer one more question if you guys have a question. Okay, the last one from that lady, please help.
Just a short advertisement. If everyone is interested in my books, it's outside there.
Hi, I'm Claudia from the Frankfurt Book Fair. And I'm not saying this because I'm from the book fair, but I just wanted to, I have two comments, one comment and one question. You probably all remember that the Frankfurt Book Fair always has a guest of honor. In 2015, it was Indonesia. And I think they did a really good job. And it's not only the country and the government which brings the authors and plans the events, but there are also a lot of institutions who take this opportunity to showcase writers, literature, everything from the guest of honor country. And I think it's a really good, and I'm really not saying this because I'm from the Frankfurt Book Fair, but I think it's marvelous that the outside world can, or other countries, can get an impression and get this whole range of authors and literature that is available in one country. And so, unfortunately, I mean, the Committee Buku Nasional was established after the guest of honor, and a lot of activities have been done, but unfortunately, as you mentioned, the minister should be here. It was stopped in 2019, and for different reasons, Indonesia is not even participating officially in the Frankfurt Book Fair. But apart from that, the Philippines is the guest of honor 10 years after Indonesia, next year's. And we can already see that we have a huge lineup of authors who will be present there. So I just wanted to say that this is also a great opportunity to work together and develop something out of that, perhaps. So that was one thing I wanted to say. And my question is, you all mentioned that English is the lingua franca at the moment because we can't, or you cannot read, a Thai person cannot read Vietnamese and so on and so forth. Do you know whether there are any aspirations, motivations to learn Vietnamese, to teach Indonesian, to teach Malaysia in Vietnam, to teach Vietnamese in Indonesia, and so on and so forth? Do you know whether there's any approach, let's say from ASEAN or from the ministries, some kind of support or some kind of strategy that goes into that direction? Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, for the question. So please.
I can take on that because I am a trying hard Indonesian speaker. Sekarang saya belajar bahasa Indonesia, and it's all thanks to the government. It's a free online class from the Indonesian embassy, and the reason why I decided to start learning bahasa Indonesia is that I read all these stories from Intan, from Pramodya, from Eka Kurniawan, and they were all in the English translation, right? I do self-translate a lot, and I have that kind of, I feel like no matter how no matter how hard I try to be faithful to the source text, there are things that are, still lost in translation. So I started learning Bahasa Indonesia so I could read the works in ambitious, right? I mean, like my vocabulary is very toddler level, and then like, when you ask my motivation, it's to read these literatures. But there is that, right, from Indonesia. From the Philippines, I know the university offers courses in Filipino and other regional languages. The linguistics department of the university, for instance, also offers other Southeast Asian languages as well as other Philippine languages. I don't think they're free though, unlike the one initiated by the Indonesian government. I did look it up online because I wanted it to be free, right? A poor, starving writer, so it has to be a free online class. So I found Bahasa Indonesia available. I'm not so sure about the rest, if there are initiatives like that.
So you're starting
I'm level 2. I can already ask berapa harganya.
After this, you can talk to Ziggy in Bahasa Indonesia. Okay, Ziggy? You have any answer?
I don't have any answer, but I do know that it's kind of like an individual effort, isn't it? Because I know that there's a Thai-Indonesian translator right now, so I think it's a matter of time until somebody started. But it's really an individual attempt, I think. It's not very facilitated. I did try to look up, I think Thai courses are much easier to find in Indonesia at least, but I looked up Vietnamese courses and it's zip. So it's something that you should do on your own, and it's something that you have to look up, and that's the only, I think it's still really challenging because it depends on individual motivations to do that. So I don't know if there's any government, definitely there's no government support here, but I don't know if there's any other attempts. Probably there should. Probably someone should start that, someone with money, hopefully.
I think I agree with Ziggy. I mean, there's no like official initiative to kind of introduce all these different languages. But that's why I think it's important to start with translation, whether it is from any language into English or Malay, because I remember reading Goethe, Faust, first time in Malay, was published by the National Institute in Malaysia. The first time I read that translation in Malay, Faust is a classic work in German, but because the translation was so good in Malay, I felt like it was like a Malay text. And because of that, it kind of made me curious how it was written in Germany. So I think when you have works from other countries, from other languages, translated into your own language, you becomes more curious, because all of a sudden this text from a foreign language feels close at home, close to your emotion and something that you can relate, even though it's like Faust is like what was written way many centuries ago, but because it was translated into Malay language, I suddenly feel that it's something that I could relate, something that I want to read more, so I think that's how it should start. So I think one initiative that is a good example maybe is the Mekong Review. The Mekong Review, even though it's in English, but it's attempt to bring together works from the region, whether it's journalism, poetry or fiction, so that at least, even though it is not in the original language, at least we are reading each other. And I think that is one step, and the next step is for every country to start doing more translated work into their language, so that we can start read each other. Yeah.
Very nice. Dio, the last but not least. Do you chat with ChatGPT maybe to learn other languages?
I don't really have an answer for that actually, but yeah, I don't really know what to say. What's its question?
You haven't started to learn any languages from Southeast Asia? Or you learn Korean maybe?
No, I learned Japan, but I really want to read Vietnamese because I really like the idea of society there. I hear a lot about them, and I want to know more about them. But I don't really have time right now for learning a new language. So yeah.
Okay, arigato gozaimashita. Okay, thank you so much. So actually, the last question has highlighted all of this panel about its how we start to know each other, to recognize each other, to read each other. It is from knowing the languages. So maybe we should start to find the right translator. If you want to translate directly from Indonesian to the Philippines or to the Vietnamese, rather than to do it with the lingua franca English. That's the first step. And then the second one, like Astrid mentioned, maybe started from reading the Mekong Review or maybe other literary journals which provide all the Southeast Asian literary pieces. The third one, maybe we can start by translating each other and then by making database like what Sabdarmandio has planned. And also, what is the SIMS?
The SIMS is kind of a collective of Southeast Asian translators. So Jeremy Tiang from Singapore, Tiffany Sao, they have this little database. So there are lots of initiatives that's been started by individuals. Again, by individuals.
Okay, started from the Siemens, also maybe DeepL, and we can find many other ways and solutions to learn the languages, of course. So this has wrapped all the discussion today. Thank you so much for attending this session. On behalf of Jakarta Content Week, we would like to thank all the speakers and participants for attending this session. We still have a lot of interesting sessions on Jakten. For more information on Jakten, follow us on Instagram at Jakten. See you.
Thank you to all the speakers, moderators, and participants who attend and participate in this session with the enthusiasm. Thank you to every participant who has joined each session of Road to Jakten from day one, and see you at Jakten X Jil in November 2024. Jakten Southeast Asian Synergy, also supported by Frankfurt Book Fair, Yayasan Lontar, Dewan Kesenian Jakarta, JIL, Jakpro, Taman Ismail Marzuki, and the National Book Development based on Philippines.